Imagine stepping into a world without soap. No fragrant bars stacked neatly in the bathroom, no bottles of shower gel waiting by the sink, and no foamy lather to wash away the day's grime. For most of human history, this was the reality. Long before soap became an everyday essential, people across civilizations found creative, sometimes surprising, and often questionable ways to stay clean. From ancient oils and scraping tools to herbs, ashes, and even urine, personal hygiene before soap was as much about culture and ritual as it was about health. In this journey, we'll travel through the centuries to uncover how our ancestors approached cleanliness. Some methods might sound ingenious, others rather uncomfortable, and a few downright strange, but all of them reveal just how resourceful humanity has always been when faced with life as daily necessities. Before we dive in, a quick request. If you enjoy relaxing with history, or if you are someone who struggles to drift off to sleep, you're in the right place. Please make sure to subscribe to History for Sleep and tap the notification bell so you never miss a new story. And let me know in the comments what kind of history you're most interested in, and when you like to listen, whether it's while lying in bed at night, during a nap, or just for a calming background during the day. So settle in, get comfortable, and let your mind wander back in time. By the end of this series, you'll never look at your morning shower or your bar of soap the same way again. Chapter 1. The meaning of cleanliness before soap. When we think about hygiene today, it often feels simple and obvious. We wash our hands with soap and water, we take a shower or bath, we brush our teeth, and we apply deodorant. But for much of human history, the very idea of what it meant to be clean was far more complicated, and it rarely involved soap at all. Before soap became a household essential, the definition of cleanliness was shaped by culture, religion, environment, and necessity. It wasn't only about removing dirt from the body. In fact, for many ancient peoples, cleanliness was as much about purity as it was about hygiene. To them, being clean often meant being spiritually ready acceptable before the gods, or fit to join society in ritual and daily life. In the earliest communities, water itself was seen as sacred. Streams, rivers, and springs were not just practical sources for drinking and irrigation. They were places where humans encountered mystery. Water had the power to cleanse, to refresh, and to renew. Long before anyone thought of soap, the act of immersing the body in water or pouring water over oneself was considered transformative. To bathe was to reset, to shake off not only sweat and grime, but also the invisible burdens of sin, impurity, and misfortune. Of course, this didn't mean people ignored the practical matter of dirt. Farmers came home with soil caked on their skin, hunters with blood on their hands, and workers with smoke and soot in their hair. Across different societies, methods developed to deal with these very physical realities. Ashes from fire, oils from plants, powders from crushed herbs, and rough tools made from reeds, stones, or bronze, all were used to help the body feel refreshed, long before soap lathered anyone's hands. But perhaps the most striking difference from modern times was this: cleanliness was rarely an individual matter. Today, we bathe alone, usually in the privacy of our homes. We wash with soap for personal comfort, and maybe for social expectations. In ancient times, though, washing was often communal and ritualized. A riverbank gathering, a temple cleansing, or a public bath was not only about hygiene, but also about belonging. To wash was to connect to family, to community, and to something greater than oneself. For instance, many early religions tied cleanliness directly to moral standing. To be dirty was not only to smell unpleasant, but also to risk being unworthy. Ceremonial washings marked moments of transition. Before entering a holy site, before offering a sacrifice, before marriage, before burial. In this sense, the absence of soap was irrelevant. What mattered most was the act of the washing itself, not the substance used. This cultural layer meant that some people washed often, while others washed rarely, depending on their traditions. For some, cleanliness was daily, even multiple times a day. For others, too much washing was thought to be dangerous, as it might weaken the body or wash away protective oils. In certain times and places, dirt itself was seen as a shield, a barrier against disease or evil forces. In other words, clean was not always the same as scrubbed. The environment also played a role in shaping hygiene. In hot, arid lands, people relied on oils to moisturize skin and keep dust from clinging. In damp regions, herbs and vinegar washes were more common. Where water was plentiful, bathing was regular. Where it was scarce, other techniques filled the gap. This diversity is part of what makes the story of pre-soap hygiene so fascinating. Each culture had its own solutions, its own rituals, and its own beliefs. We should also pause to consider something else: smells. Modern life has conditioned us to expect a world of fresh scents. We buy soaps with lavender, citrus, or ocean breeze fragrance. We spray perfumes and deodorants to avoid the faintest hint of sweat. But in earlier times, the baseline of human life was different. Everyone smelled of labor, of fire, of earth. To cover odor was sometimes possible with flowers, oils, or incense, but rarely expected. Cleanliness did not mean smelling like roses. It meant not being offensive to the senses of others, or more importantly, not being offensive to the gods. By starting here, with the meaning of cleanliness itself, we can begin to appreciate how varied and inventive human beings have always been. When soap was not available, people didn't simply live in filth. They adapted. They scraped their skin with tools, rubbed themselves with oils, brushed with powders, and rinsed in rivers. They found meaning in these practices, and in doing so, laid the groundwork for the hygiene habits we take for granted today. This journey into the world before soap will take us from the bustling cities of Mesopotamia to the ritual baths of Egypt, from the gymnasiums of Greece to the grand bathhouses of Rome, from the sacred rivers of India to the steam-filled hammams of the Islamic world. Along the way, we'll discover traditions that may surprise us, some ingenious, some strange, and some that feel surprisingly familiar. So as you listen, let your imagination drift back into these worlds. Picture the ancient farmer rinsing in a stream, the priest pouring sacred water over worshippers, the Roman reclining in a heated bath. Imagine the feel of oil scraped from the skin, the scent of herbs steeped in water, the quiet sound of rushing rivers and trickling fountains. In the end, the story of cleanliness before soap is the story of human resilience and creativity. It is the story of how people everywhere, from the dawn of civilization to the edge of modernity, found ways to care for themselves and each other without the simple tools we now consider essential. And as we begin this journey, perhaps it will remind us that even something as ordinary as a bar of soap carries within it a long, winding history of human ingenuity. Chapter 2: Ancient Mesopotamia, Oils, Ashes, and Early Washes. To understand how humanity first experimented with cleanliness, we have to return to one of the cradles of civilization, Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates. Here, nearly 6,000 years ago, some of the earliest known cities rose from the fertile plains. With cities came density, and with density came a new challenge: how to manage hygiene when thousands of people lived closely together. The Mesopotamians were innovators in countless ways: writing, law, and mathematics. It should come as no surprise that they also paid careful attention to personal cleanliness. Archaeologists studying the ruins of Sumerian and Babylonian cities have uncovered not only homes with drainage systems, but also evidence of bathing areas, clay basins, and jars that once held oils and cleansing agents. In a world where daily life was hot, dusty, and physically demanding, the need for refreshment was constant. Water, drawn from rivers and canals, was the starting point of Mesopotamian hygiene. It was both practical and spiritual. To wash with water was to cool the body after long hours under the blazing sun, to rinse away the dust of the fields and the markets. But it was also to prepare oneself for sacred duties. Priests of Mesopotamian temples, for example, were required to purify themselves with water before entering holy spaces. Washing was tied to readiness, not just for work, but for contact with the divine. Unlike later cultures that developed elaborate bathhouses, Mesopotamians appear to have practiced washing in simpler forms. Water basins in households suggest that rinsing the hands and face was part of daily routine. Families could pour water from clay vessels, letting it run into the drains that carried it away. In this way, hygiene was woven into the architecture of their homes. But water alone was not always enough. To deal with sweat, grime, and odor, Mesopotamians turned to the natural resources at hand. Ashes from burned wood were sometimes mixed with water to create a basic cleansing slurry. This might sting by modern standards, but it was effective for scrubbing away dirt. More luxurious was the use of oils. Pressed from olives and other plants, oils were applied to the skin, not only to protect it from the harsh climate, but also to aid in cleansing. A person could rub oil across the body, loosening dirt and sweat, then scrape it off with a curved tool. This method, later perfected by Greeks and Romans with their strigils, was already present in Mesopotamian daily life. Oils left the skin moisturized, fragrant, and less likely to crack in the relentless heat. Perfumed oils were especially prized. Records written on clay tablets mention scented unguents infused with cedar, myrrh, or other aromatic plants. These oils signaled wealth and refinement, but they also carried symbolic meaning. Fragrance was associated with the gods. To smell sweet was to align oneself with the divine, while foul odors suggested impurity or misfortune. Interestingly, Mesopotamia may also hold the secret of soap's first appearance, though it was not yet the everyday product we know. Babylonian tablets from around 2800 BC describe a mixture of water, alkali derived from ashes, and fats, essentially the ingredients of primitive soap. But this early soap was not primarily used for bathing. Instead, it was employed for washing wool and textiles, preparing them for dyeing. For personal hygiene, oils and simple washing remained the norm. Still, this discovery reveals the ingenuity of these early peoples. They were experimenting with chemical reactions that would one day transform hygiene worldwide. Cleanliness in Mesopotamia was not limited to the body. It extended into every aspect of life, especially religion. Temples were considered the homes of the gods, and those who entered needed to be ritually pure. Priests performed frequent ablutions, washing their hands, mouths, and bodies before ceremonies. Clay inscriptions even prescribed specific washing rituals for those seeking divine guidance. In epic literature, the act of washing appears again and again as a moment of renewal. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving works of literature, the hero is described washing himself and changing his garments after his exhausting journeys. Cleanliness marked not just physical refreshment, but also a transition in spirit, a return to dignity. Mesopotamian healers also connected washing with health. Clay tablets from medical texts describe remedies that involved cleansing wounds with water or rinsing the body with specific solutions. Oils and ointments were applied to soothe the skin, while ashes and salts could be used to dry out infections. Hygiene was not only about appearance, it was an early form of medical practice. At the same time, some beliefs tied cleanliness to protection from unseen forces. Diseases were often thought to be caused by evil spirits or the displeasure of gods. Washing, perfuming, and anointing could act as spiritual defenses. The scent of cedar oil, for instance, was thought to repel malevolent influences. In this way, hygiene served as a bridge between the physical and the mystical. So, what might a day in ancient Mesopotamia have looked like when it came to hygiene? Picture a Sumerian farmer rising before dawn. He rinses his face in cool water from a clay jar, perhaps rubbing a little oil onto his skin before heading to the fields. At midday, sweaty and coated in dust, he returns to pour water over his arms and legs. If he can afford it, he applies a touch of perfumed oil luxury in a humble life. In the city, a merchant at the bustling markets might keep a basin nearby to rinse his hands before eating. Before entering a temple, he stops to wash more thoroughly, cleansing himself so that he may stand before the gods in purity. At night, as lamps are lit, families gather, and a final rinse with water closes the day. Even in these small routines, the values of Mesopotamian society shine through: respect for the divine, care for the body, an acknowledgement that cleanliness was essential not only for health, but for harmony with the world. Though their practices were simple compared to what would follow, the Mesopotamians left a lasting legacy. Their experiments with oils and ashes laid the groundwork for later developments in soap. Their emphasis on ritual washing influenced neighboring cultures and faiths, and their integration of hygiene into architecture through drains, basins, and water systems foreshadowed the plumbing innovations of Rome. More importantly, their example shows us that the instinct to be clean is ancient. Even without soap, even without modern science, humans have always sought ways to feel refreshed, to banish dirt and odor, and to present themselves as worthy before each other and before higher powers. As we leave Mesopotamia and journey next into ancient Egypt, we'll see how another civilization took the concept of cleanliness to dazzling heights. For the Egyptians, hygiene was not only about survival under the sun, but also about beauty, ritual, and preparation for eternity itself. Chapter 3. Ancient Egypt. Ritual bathing and perfumed oils. If there was ever a civilization that placed extraordinary value on cleanliness, it was ancient Egypt. To the Egyptians, being clean was not just a matter of comfort in a hot and dusty climate. It was an essential part of their culture, religion, and identity. The image of ancient Egypt that lingers in our minds, gleaming temples, smooth stone statues, shining jewelry, and painted murals, is also a reflection of how much they valued order, purity, and presentation. Cleanliness was part of their pursuit of harmony, what they called mat, the balance of the world. Egypt's geography shaped this deep devotion to hygiene. The Nile River was the source of life, providing water for drinking, farming, and bathing. Seasonal flooding renewed the soil, but it also left behind heat, mud, and swarms of insects. Against this backdrop, frequent washing became not just pleasant but necessary. Egyptian art and writings consistently depict water and bathing as central to both daily routine and sacred ritual. In daily life, Egyptians of nearly every class practiced washing. Wealthy households might have had access to stone basins where servants poured water over their masters, while ordinary families drew water from the Nile or communal wells. Bathing was often done in the open, with water poured over the body rather than soaking in a tub. What mattered was freshness, removing sweat, dust, and the ever-present grit carried by desert winds. One of the most remarkable aspects of Egyptian hygiene was their use of natron, a naturally occurring mixture of salts found in dry lake beds. Natron was coarse and absorbent, and it worked both as a cleanser and a deodorizer. It could be dissolved in water to rinse the body or rub dry on the skin to combat odor. In a hot climate where sweating was constant, natron became one of Egypt's most important natural resources, used in households as well as temples. Equally important were oils and ointments. Egyptians rubbed their bodies with oils made from castor, moringa, and sesame plants. These oils had multiple purposes. They moisturized the skin, protected against dryness, and carried pleasant scents when infused with herbs or flowers. In paintings and carvings, figures are often shown with cones of scented fat placed on their heads, wax-like perfumes that slowly melted in the heat, releasing fragrance into the air. For Egyptians, to smell good was to live well, and oils blurred the line between cleanliness, luxury, and spiritual preparation. Perfumes were especially significant. The Egyptians pioneered the art of perfume making, creating blends that were both cosmetic and sacred. Frankincense, myrrh, and lotus were among their favorites. Burned in temples as offerings and worn on the body as signs of grace. To be perfumed was to be elevated, closer to the gods. The connection between scent and sanctity was so strong that many religious rituals included the burning of incense, filling the air with a sweet-smelling smoke that carried prayers to the heavens. Priests, in particular, were held to strict standards of hygiene. Before performing rituals, they shaved their bodies completely, removing every hair to symbolize purity. They bathed several times a day, using water, natron, and oils. The process was not optional, but essential. A priest who was unwashed was unfit to approach the gods. In this way, daily hygiene practices were elevated to spiritual law, binding the physical with the divine. The importance of cleanliness extended into death as well. Egyptians are famous for their process of mummification, and hygiene was at the heart of it. The body was washed, cleansed with natron, and anointed with oils before being wrapped in linen. This was not simply preservation, but preparation for eternity. Just as the living needed to be clean to face the gods, so too did the dead. Cleanliness became the gateway to immortality. Hygiene also shaped how Egyptians presented themselves socially. Hairstyles were carefully maintained, with wigs often worn to project status and beauty. These wigs were kept fresh with perfumed ointments. Teeth were brushed with powders made from ground pumice, ash, or crushed eggshells mixed with herbs. Eye makeup, most famously kohl, was not just decoration, but protection. Its mineral base helped guard against infections from the glaring sun and Nile water. To be well-groomed was to be admired, respected, and seen as living in harmony with Mut. Even the humblest Egyptians followed these customs in their own way. Farmers and laborers may not have had elaborate perfumes, but they still bathed with river water and used natron when possible. They may have rubbed their skin with simple animal fats to prevent it from cracking in the sun. Cleanliness was not only for the elite. It was a shared cultural value that stretched across the classes. Visitors to Egypt in later centuries often remarked on the Egyptians' remarkable cleanliness compared to other peoples. Ancient Greek writers, for example, were impressed by how frequently Egyptians bathed and shaved. Herodotus, the Greek historian, noted that Egyptian priests washed twice a day and twice at night, an astonishing level of dedication by ancient standards. To outsiders, this devotion to hygiene was both admirable and unusual. One might wonder how Egyptians managed to maintain such standards in an age without plumbing or soap. The answer lies in their ingenuity and their environment. With the Nile at their disposal, water was abundant. With natron from the desert, they had a powerful natural cleanser. With plants and resins, they created oils and perfumes. Their solutions were perfectly tailored to their world, and they turned necessity into a cultural hallmark. The symbolic weight of these practices cannot be overstated. For Egyptians, being clean was never just about removing dirt. It was about aligning oneself with cosmic order, showing respect to gods and neighbors alike, and preparing the body and soul for both this life and the next. A person who washed daily, who perfumed their skin, who kept their hair and teeth in order, was not only attractive but righteous. If we imagine an evening in an Egyptian household, the picture comes alive. A man rinses himself with cool water fetched from the river, while his wife rubs fragrant oil into her arms. Children are dusted with natron to keep them fresh in the heat. In the temple nearby, priests prepare for their nightly rituals, bathing again and again until their bodies gleam. Outside, incense burns, sending sweet smoke into the twilight. The scent lingers, the people feel renewed, and the gods are said to be pleased. The Egyptian devotion to hygiene left its mark on history. Their methods of perfume making influenced later cultures in Greece and Rome. Their use of natron inspired later experiments with soaps and detergents. And their association of cleanliness with spiritual readiness became part of religious traditions that continue even today. From the Nile to the desert, from life to death, the Egyptians lived and breathed the belief that to be clean was to be whole. In their world, there was no separation between hygiene, beauty, and holiness. They were all expressions of the same truth, that human beings, fragile and fleeting, could aspire to reflect the eternal order of the cosmos. As we leave the land of the pyramids, we travel westward to Greece, where another culture wove its own ideas of health and hygiene. There, in the gymnasiums and public spaces, oils and tools replaced natron, and the act of scraping the body became both a practical habit and a cultural symbol. Chapter 4, Greece. The gymnasium, strigils, and olive oil. If ancient Egypt connected cleanliness with sacred order, the Greeks wove hygiene into the fabric of daily life, public culture, and the pursuit of physical excellence. To the people of Greece, the body was not only a vessel for the soul, but also a reflection of beauty, strength, and discipline. Cleanliness, therefore, was more than a habit. It was a philosophy. The Greek word gymnos means naked, and from it comes gymnasium, a place where citizens gathered to exercise, train, and cultivate their minds as well as their bodies. The gymnasium was central to Greek social life, and it was here that many of their hygiene practices unfolded. Men stripped down, coated their bodies in olive oil, and worked through routines of wrestling, running, and discus throwing. Sweat, dust, and oil clung to their skin, but afterward came the ritual of cleansing, the scraping of the strigil. A strigil was a curved metal tool, often bronze, designed to remove oil, dirt, and sweat. After exercising, a man would scrape his body carefully, dragging the strigil across his limbs, chest, and back. What came off was a mixture known as glowios, a greasy combination of oil, dust, and skin. Oddly enough, this waste product was not always discarded. Some was saved and even sold, believed to have medicinal qualities. Athletes and healers sometimes kept glowios in small pots, applying it to wounds as a kind of remedy. For the Greeks, however, the act of scraping was more than just functional. It was a moment of discipline, part of the daily rhythm of training and care. To exercise and not cleanse would have been unthinkable. Cleanliness kept the body supple, the skin refreshed, and the appearance pleasing. In a society that celebrated the human form through sculpture, poetry, and competition, keeping the body well maintained was an extension of civic pride. Olive oil was at the center of this world. Greece was covered in olive groves, and oil was used in cooking, lamp fuel, religious offerings, and hygiene. To anoint the body with oil before exercise softened the skin, protected it from the sun, and gave it a sheen that emphasized the musculature. After scraping, more oil might be applied to restore moisture and fragrance. The smell of olive oil mixed with herbs or flowers was familiar to anyone walking near a gymnasium. The practice of communal bathing was also part of Greek life, though in a simpler form than what Rome later perfected. Public baths included basins and small pools where men washed after exercise or before religious rites. Bathing was often accompanied by conversation, games, and even philosophy. The gymnasium, after all, was not only for physical training, but also for learning. Teachers and students gathered there, and discussions often flowed between exercises and washing. Women's hygiene practices are less documented, but evidence suggests they too used oils and perfumed unguents for the skin and hair. Greek women took care to braid and dress their hair with scented oils, and they may have used strigils in private settings. Baths, perfumes, and grooming were part of preparing for festivals, marriages, and family gatherings. Religion also linked to cleanliness in subtle ways. Before approaching temples or participating in sacred rituals, washing was customary. Hands, feet, and faces were rinsed as acts of respect to the gods. Fountains were placed near sanctuaries for this purpose, so that worshippers might cleanse themselves before offering prayers or sacrifices. In Greek tragedies and poetry, washing often symbolized renewal heroes emerging from water oil to take on new strength. Medical writers of Greece also considered hygiene important. Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, advised washing and anointing as part of health. He recognized the role of exercise, diet, and cleanliness in preventing illness. To the Greeks, balance was key. Too little washing left the body sullied. Too much might weaken it. The ideal was moderation, an idea that echoed throughout Greek philosophy. The connection between hygiene and identity was also clear in Greek attitudes toward outsiders. To Greeks, their practices of oiling, scraping, and bathing marked them as civilized. Other peoples who did not follow such customs were sometimes described as barbarous. In this way, hygiene became part of cultural pride, another way in which Greeks distinguished themselves from their neighbors. Imagine a typical day in Athens. A young man rises early, walks to the gymnasium, and strips down. He rubs oil into his skin, stretches, and begins his exercises. Hours later, glistening with sweat, he reaches for his strigil. With careful strokes, he scrapes the oil and grime away, leaving his skin fresh. He steps into a small basin of cool water, rinses, and reapplies oil perfumed with herbs. Then he joins friends in conversation, perhaps discussing politics, poetry, or the plays being performed at the theater. A cycle of exertion, cleansing, and social life completes itself, reflecting the Greek ideal of harmony between body and mind. The practice of oiling and scraping spread widely, becoming a hallmark of Greek culture. It impressed foreigners, puzzled some, and inspired others. Later, the Romans would adopt the strigil and elevate the bathhouse into a grand institution. But it was in Greece that the foundation was laid, where the link between fitness, beauty, and cleanliness was forged. Beyond the gymnasium, perfumes and cosmetics played an important role in private life. Wealthy Greeks imported exotic scents from Egypt and the Near East, blending them with local oils. Fragrance was used sparingly, often as a finishing touch after washing. Too much perfume was considered indulgent, even effeminate, but just enough conveyed refinement. Scent was, as in many cultures, a social signal as much as a personal pleasure. Greek art itself reflects these ideals. Vase paintings often depict men with strigils, athletes anointing themselves with oil in scenes of bathing. Sculptures of gods and heroes show smooth, gleaming bodies, echoing the effects of oil and scraping. To be clean and polished was not only practical but aesthetic, a way of embodying the divine ideal. In all of this, one sees how the Greeks transformed simple acts of hygiene into a reflection of their broader values. To wash and anoint was to honor the body, the city, and the gods. It was a statement of balance between sweat and refreshment, exertion and rest, dirt and oil, body and soul. Cleanliness was not a separate concern, but part of a seamless whole, a culture that placed the human form at its center. As we move forward in history, we will see how Rome took these practices and expanded them into something vast and elaborate. Where the Greeks found harmony in the gymnasium and the strigil, the Romans built vast bathhouses that became the heart of social life. Their innovations would carry the idea of communal cleanliness across an empire, shaping hygiene practices for centuries to come. Chapter 5: Rome, the grandeur of the bathhouses. If the Greeks shaped hygiene into a philosophy of balance and beauty, the Romans transformed it into an institution of empire. In Rome, bathing was no longer a private matter, nor even a small communal custom. It was a spectacle, a way of life, and a cornerstone of civic identity. The Roman bathhouse was both a marvel of engineering and a symbol of Roman culture, where hygiene intertwined with leisure, politics, and social order. At its heart, The Roman approach to cleanliness was built on scale. While the Greeks oiled and scraped in gymnasiums, Romans built vast complexes called thermae. These were more than places to wash. They were architectural wonders, complete with soaring ceilings, marble floors, and intricate mosaics. Heated by ingenious systems of underground furnaces known as hypocausts, they offered hot baths, warm baths, cold baths, and everything in between. Entering a bathhouse was like stepping into another world, where water, heat, and ritual combined to create both comfort and spectacle. The typical sequence of a Roman bath was a carefully choreographed journey. A visitor might begin in the appetitorium, a changing room where clothes were stored. From there, they moved to the tepidarium, a warm chamber that acclimated the body. Next came the caldarium, a hot, steamy room where sweat poured freely. Here, oils were rubbed into the skin, and attendants or slaves might scrape the body with strigils, removing dirt and oil. Afterward, one plunged into the frigidarium, a cold pool that tightened the skin and refreshed the spirit. This rhythm, warmth, heat, oil, scraping, cold, was the heartbeat of the Roman bath. But bathing in Rome was not only about the body. It was also about the mind and community. Bathhouses contained libraries, lecture halls, gardens, and exercise spaces. Politicians mingled with citizens, philosophers debated, merchants negotiated deals, and friends met to gossip. The bath was the center of urban life, an equalizer where men of different classes could share the same waters. Even emperors, though separated by guards and attendants, used the baths, reinforcing the idea that cleanliness and leisure were the birthright of Roman citizens. Hygiene practices in the bathhouse followed Greek traditions but expanded in richness. Olive oil remained central, rubbed onto the skin and scraped away with strigils. Perfumes and scented ointments, often imported from Egypt or Arabia, were sold to bathers. Wealthy citizens might employ personal attendants to massage them with oils, comb their hair, and file their nails. The body was pampered, groomed, and polished, reflecting Rome's love of luxury and display. Water itself was plentiful, thanks to aqueducts, those great arteries of stone that carried fresh water across miles of countryside into cities. Aqueducts fed fountains, cisterns, and of course, the baths. Rome's engineering genius meant that even in a city of 1 million people, water was abundant enough to flow constantly, filling basins and pools that sparkled in the sunlight. For Romans, the ability to bathe daily was proof of their civilization's greatness. Not everyone in Rome, however, enjoyed the same standards. Wealthier citizens had access to the grandest thermae, like those built by Emperors Caracalla and Diocletian, vast complexes that could hold thousands of bathers at once. Poorer neighborhoods relied on smaller, more modest baths, or even simple basins in their homes. Still, compared to many societies, the average Roman had remarkable access to cleanliness. Baths were cheap to enter, often subsidized by politicians eager to win favor with the people. Cleanliness, therefore, was tied to politics as much as to personal comfort. Religion, too, was connected to bathing. Romans saw the baths as places not only of refreshment, but also of renewal. Statues of gods often adorned the complexes, and rituals of cleansing before sacrifices or ceremonies echoed the importance of water in spiritual life. The goddess Hygiene, whose name gives us the word hygiene, symbolized health and cleanliness. To bathe was to align oneself with the ideals of health, beauty, and civic virtue. Of course, hygiene in Rome was not without its oddities. Communal bathing meant that large numbers of people shared the same pools, and without the benefits of modern sanitation, illnesses could spread. Ancient writers sometimes complained about the crowded and noisy atmosphere of the baths, where arguments, laughter, and splashing filled the air. Yet for most Romans, the benefits far outweighed the risks. A bath was refreshing, social, and often entertaining. Women also participated in bathing, though often in separate spaces or at designated hours. Their routines included the use of oils, perfumes, and cosmetics, emphasizing beauty as much as cleanliness. Hair care was elaborate, with scented oils applied to braids and wigs. Nail polish, skin creams, and tooth powders added to the sense of grooming. In both male and female culture, the idea of presenting oneself well was inseparable from the act of cleansing. The Roman baths also became a symbol of empire, spreading to every corner of Roman control. From Britain to North Africa, from Spain to the Middle East, archaeologists have uncovered remains of bathhouses, all built in the same recognizable style. To be Roman was to bathe in Roman fashion. Even conquered peoples, at first bewildered by the scale of these complexes, eventually came to adopt them as part of their daily lives. If we imagine a day in Rome, the bathhouse looms large. Picture a bustling city street, the hum of voices, the clatter of carts. Citizens stream into the baths, shedding their clothes in the appetiterium. The air grows warm and humid as they pass through the chambers, oil rubbed into their skin, strigils scraping with gentle rhythm. Laughter echoes in the steamy air. Outside, vendors sell perfumes and snacks. In one corner, a group debates philosophy. In another, a politician quietly courts support. Hours pass in a haze of heat, cool water, fragrance, and conversation. Emerging from the baths, the bather feels renewed clean in body, refreshed in mind, connected once more to the pulse of the city. Rome's devotion to bathing left a legacy that echoed long after the empire's fall. The engineering feats of aqueducts and hypocausts inspired later civilizations. A culture of communal bathing influenced medieval and Islamic traditions. And the very idea that cleanliness was a shared civic good, not just a private luxury, was a Roman gift to the world. Yet, when Rome eventually declined, the grandeur of the baths disappeared with it. Many fell into ruin, aqueducts crumbled, and the practice of daily communal bathing faded. In its place, new attitudes toward cleanliness emerged, shaped by religion, fear of disease, and changing social structures. But the memory of Rome's baths remained, inspiring later generations with visions of marble pools, steaming chambers, and the hum of voices rising beneath vaulted ceilings. For now, as we leave the marble halls of the Roman baths, we step into another world, one shaped by rivers, ritual, and medicine. In India, the act of bathing carried not just physical meaning, but deep spiritual power, binding cleanliness to the cycle of life and the pursuit of health. Chapter 6. India and the Indus Traditions. When we turn eastward to the Indian subcontinent, we find one of the oldest and most enduring traditions of cleanliness in the world. In India, the practice of bathing and purification was not simply a matter of hygiene or comfort. It was inseparable from spirituality, medicine, and the rhythms of daily life. Long before the rise of great kingdoms and empires, the people of the Indus Valley built their cities with bathing at the center, a clear sign of how much they valued water and its cleansing power. Archaeologists uncovering the ruins of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa cities that flourished over 4,000 years ago found something remarkable: carefully constructed baths, drainage systems, and water tanks. The most famous of these is the Great Bath of Mohenjo-daro, a large brick-lined pool with steps descending into it from both sides. Its very presence suggests that bathing was not just functional, but ceremonial. Cleanliness, for these early urban dwellers, was already linked with ritual, community, and order. The layout of these cities reveals an astonishing attention to sanitation. Streets were lined with covered drains, homes had private bathing areas, and wastewater was channeled away efficiently. In a time when many parts of the world had only the most basic methods for removing dirt, the Indus people had already developed a system that prioritized hygiene. To live in these cities was to live in an environment where bathing and washing were part of daily rhythm. This emphasis on water carried forward into the Vedic traditions that shaped Indian culture in later centuries. In the sacred texts of Hinduism, bathing was described as a vital practice for spiritual purity. Rivers, especially the Ganges, became holy sites where immersion cleansed not only the body, but also the soul. To wash in sacred waters was to wash away sins, misfortune, and impurities, preparing oneself for prayer and for life's transitions. Bathing in rivers at dawn, before worship or meditation, became a timeless custom that endures to this day. Ayurveda, the ancient system of medicine developed in India, also emphasized cleanliness as a foundation of health. Daily routines, known as dinacharya, recommended bathing as part of maintaining balance in the body's energies, or doshas. Herbs, powders, and oils were employed to cleanse, protect, and restore harmony. Turmeric, sandalwood, neem, and other plants were ground into pastes that could be applied to the skin, serving both medicinal and cleansing purposes. The use of these natural substances reflected a holistic view of Hygiene one that saw no boundary between physical health and spiritual well-being. In Indian tradition, oil played a role as important as water. Sesame oil, coconut oil, and other plant-based oils were massaged into the skin and hair, a practice that not only moisturized, but also promoted relaxation and circulation. The ritual of oil massage, or abhyanga, was considered both therapeutic and purifying. Children, adults, and the elderly all participated in this practice, making it a family tradition as much as a personal one. After massage came bathing, the warm water washing away the oil along with sweat and dirt, leaving the skin supple and the spirit refreshed. Hair and dental care were also well developed. The chewing of twigs, especially from the neem tree, served as an early toothbrush, cleaning the teeth and strengthening the gums. Hair was oiled, combed, and often perfumed with flowers. In every aspect, hygiene in India extended beyond basic washing to a comprehensive care of the body. The social and religious significance of bathing shaped festivals and rituals. Pilgrimages to rivers, lakes, and sacred springs were undertaken for the sake of cleansing. During holy days, mass bathing events drew thousands to the waters, each person immersing themselves with prayers for renewal. To refuse to bathe was not merely neglect, it was to risk impurity, both social and spiritual. Cleanliness was a duty, a devotion, and a gift to the gods. What made Indian traditions especially enduring was their adaptability. Unlike Rome's grand aqueducts or Greece's gymnasiums, which faded with time, the Indian customs of bathing in rivers and using herbs remained deeply rooted in everyday life. They required no great infrastructure, only rivers, oils, and plants resources that remained abundant. As dynasties rose and fell, the act of bathing at dawn, the ritual of anointing with oil, and the faith in the cleansing power of water continued unbroken. If we imagine a morning in ancient India, the picture is vivid. At the first light of dawn, men and women walk toward the river. Some carry copper vessels, filled with water to be poured over the body. Others wade directly into the cool current, immersing themselves while chanting prayers. Children laugh as they splash nearby, while elders dip slowly, reverently. Along the banks, the scent of sandalwood drifts from oils being rubbed into skin. The sound of bells and chants mingles with the rush of water. The rising sun turns the river to gold, and the people, cleansed in body and spirit, return to their homes renewed. For the Indians, cleanliness was never divorced from meaning. To be washed was to be blessed. To be perfumed was to honor life itself. Hygiene was not merely a physical state, but a pathway to harmony with the universe. This understanding made their practices both practical and profound, shaping a culture where cleanliness and spirituality became inseparable. The legacy of these traditions continues even now. Pilgrimages to the Ganges still draw millions. Ayurvedic herbs remain part of wellness practices around the world. Oil massage is cherished both in homes and in modern spas. The Indian approach to hygiene reminds us that long before soap, Human beings had already created rich systems of care that honored the body, soothed the mind, and uplifted the soul. As we leave the rivers of India and the chants of the Vedic world, our journey carries us farther east to the lands of ancient China. There, too, water and ritual played a role, but the Chinese approach to hygiene wove together herbal remedies, philosophy, and a vision of cleanliness tied to balance and inner harmony. Chapter 7, China. Herbal washes and ritual cleanliness. When we turn to ancient China, we encounter a culture that viewed cleanliness not only through the lens of health and ritual, but also as part of a broader philosophy of balance and harmony. For the Chinese, personal hygiene was never just about removing dirt from the body. It was about aligning oneself with the rhythms of nature, restoring balance to the body's energies, and ensuring that both the visible and invisible aspects of life remained in harmony. China's earliest dynasties reveal a deep respect for water. Rivers such as the Yellow River and the Yangtze were more than sources of sustenance. They were symbols of life and renewal. Washing in these waters was seen as a way to purify both body and spirit. Seasonal festivals often included rituals of bathing, where entire communities immersed themselves to mark transitions in the year. Water, in Chinese thought, was not only cleansing but also transformative, embodying the qualities of flow, adaptability, and renewal. By the Zhou dynasty, bathing had become part of etiquette. Records suggest that nobles and officials were expected to wash before important ceremonies and audiences. To appear unwashed was a sign of disrespect, not only to others, but also to the natural and cosmic order. Cleanliness was woven into the practice of li, or ritual propriety, which governed so much of social life in China. Herbal knowledge played a central role in hygiene. Long before soap, the Chinese prepared washes and powders from a wide array of plants. Leaves, roots, and flowers were steeped in water to create cleansing infusions. Chrysanthemum, mugwort, and honeysuckle were used for their soothing qualities. Ginger and mint provided warmth or cooling effects depending on the season. These herbal baths were not only refreshing, but also medicinal, guarding against illness and strengthening the body's vitality, or qi. Hair care was especially important in Chinese culture, as hair was considered a gift from one's parents and thus worthy of respect. People washed their hair with infusions made from rice water or herbal mixtures, leaving it glossy and strong. Combing the hair was itself a ritual act, believed to promote health by stimulating circulation. Oils and perfumes were sometimes added, filling homes with subtle fragrances of jasmine, camellia, or sandalwood. Dental hygiene also received attention. Historical texts describe the use of aromatic herbs, powders, and chewing sticks to clean the teeth and freshen the breath. Ground salt and herbal mixtures acted as early tooth powders, while twigs from fragrant trees doubled as toothbrushes. Just as in India, these practices reflected a belief that the mouth was a gateway to health and vitality. Cleanliness was also linked to spiritual and philosophical traditions. In Taoist practice, bathing was part of purification rituals designed to bring the practitioner closer to harmony with the Tao, the underlying order of the universe. Washing away physical grime symbolized washing away attachments, distractions, and impurities of the spirit. Monks and practitioners bathed before meditation, seeking clarity of mind through clarity of body. In Confucian thought, cleanliness was associated with self-discipline and respect. To present oneself washed and well-groomed was to show consideration for others and to honor the order of society. A person who neglected their appearance was not only careless, but failed in their duty to family and community. Thus, bathing and grooming were ethical acts as much as personal ones. Bathhouses also became part of urban life. During the Tang and Song dynasties, bathhouses flourished in cities, offering herbal baths, massages, and grooming services. These establishments were frequented by merchants, scholars, and common folk alike. They were places not only to wash, but also to socialize, exchange news, and relax. The hum of conversation mixed with the scent of steaming herbs created an atmosphere of calm and renewal. Even in rural areas, bathing remained a valued tradition. Families drew water from wells, rivers, or heated cauldrons, often adding herbs or flowers to the water. Seasonal baths marked times of transition, such as the Dragon Boat Festival, when people washed with mugwort and calamus to drive away sickness and evil spirits. These customs bound cleanliness to the cycles of nature, reinforcing the idea that hygiene was not only practical, but also protective. The Chinese also connected bathing with medicine in a highly developed way. Physicians prescribed herbal baths for ailments, ranging from fevers to skin conditions. Warm water infused with particular plants was believed to restore balance to the body's yin and yang. The practice of steaming, too, was used as a therapeutic treatment, opening the pores and allowing the body to expel toxins. In this sense, bathing became a form of healing as much as of hygiene. If we imagine an evening in a Chinese household centuries ago, the scene is serene. A large wooden tub is filled with warm water infused with herbs. The fragrance of chrysanthemum drifts through the room as family members take turns bathing. Hair is rinsed with rice water, then carefully combed. Afterward, the family sits together, skin refreshed, hair gleaming, and spirits calm. Outside, lanterns glow in the night, and the river murmurs softly nearby. Cleanliness is not only a private comfort, but a shared ritual, a way of living in harmony with each other and with the world. Over the centuries, these traditions endured. Herbal washes, rice water rinses, and seasonal bathing festivals continued to shape Chinese life. Even as new influences arrived, such as Buddhist practices of ritual washing or foreign trade-bringing perfumes, the core values remained the same: cleanliness as balance, as respect, as a pathway to health and harmony. The Chinese example shows us that hygiene can be more than routine. It can be philosophy and practice, a daily act that ties the individual to the cosmos. By cleansing the body, one also nourishes the mind and honors the larger order of life. As our journey continues, we move toward another culture where water, ritual, and cleanliness became inseparable. In the Islamic Golden Age, hygiene was elevated to a spiritual duty, with ablutions and hammams shaping daily life across vast regions of the world. Chapter 8: The Islamic Golden Age, Water, Purity, and Hammams. As our journey moves into the Islamic world, we find a civilization where cleanliness was not only a habit or a philosophy, but a religious obligation woven into the daily lives of millions. From the deserts of Arabia to the bustling cities of Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba, hygiene was understood as both a physical and spiritual act. The emphasis on washing, purity, and ritual cleanliness helped shape one of the most influential hygiene traditions in human history. At the heart of this devotion was the teaching of Islam itself. The Quran and the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad emphasized cleanliness as central to faith. Purity is half of faith, one hadith declares, capturing the idea that to be clean was not only to care for the body, but also to prepare the soul. This teaching meant that even the simplest acts of washing carried immense meaning. Muslims were required to perform ablutions, or wudu, before prayer, which occurred 5 times a day. Each ablution involved carefully washing the hands, mouth, nose, face, arms, head, and feet. This ritual prepared the believer to stand before God in prayer, ensuring that the body was fresh and the spirit attentive. In cases where water was scarce, as in desert regions, a symbolic cleansing called tayammum using clean earth or sand was permitted, showing that the principle of purity was more important than the substance itself. In addition to wudu, there was ghusl, a full body washing required after certain events, such as marriage, menstruation, or before attending the Friday prayer. These practices ensured that washing was not occasional, but deeply ingrained in the rhythm of life. A devout Muslim might wash multiple times each day, far more frequently than was common in many other cultures at the same time. This devotion to cleanliness was supported by infrastructure. Cities in the Islamic Golden Age became famous for their hammams, or public bathhouses, though the idea of communal bathing was inherited from Rome. The Islamic world adapted it into something new. Hammams were smaller than the vast Romang thermae, but they were more numerous, found in cities, towns, and villages alike. Their design was elegant yet practical, a series of warm, hot, and cold rooms, heated by furnaces that circulated steam and warmth beneath the floors. Visiting a hammam was not only about hygiene, but also about community. Men and women, on separate days or at separate times, gathered to bathe, relax, and socialize. The hammam was a place of refreshment after long work, a meeting place for neighbors, and a hub of conversation. For women, especially, the hammam offered rare public space where they could gather freely, celebrating weddings, preparing for festivals, or simply enjoying companionship. The hammam also became a place of therapy. Massages with oils, scrubbing with rough mitts, and herbal steam treatments were all part of the experience. Bathers might emerge not only clean, but invigorated, their skin glowing, their spirits lifted. The combination of heat, steam, and thorough scrubbing was seen as a safeguard against disease and fatigue, a belief that resonates with modern understandings of hygiene and wellness. Herbal and perfumed oils played a central role in Islamic hygiene. Traders brought resins, spices, and flowers from across Asia and Africa, filling markets with scents of rose, sandalwood, musk, and amber. These oils were used not only in baths, but also as daily anointments, keeping the body fragrant and the skin supple. Perfume itself held special significance in Islamic culture. The Prophet Muhammad was known to have cherished perfumes, and fragrance was seen as a blessing, a gift that honored both God and community. Dental hygiene, too, was strongly emphasized. The miswak, a twig from the arak tree, was widely used as a toothbrush. Its fibrous end cleaned the teeth effectively, and its antibacterial properties kept the mouth healthy. Using the miswak was considered a sunnah, or practice of the Prophet, and it became a common daily habit across the Islamic world. Even travelers carried miswaks, ensuring that oral cleanliness was maintained at all times. Hygiene was also linked to medicine. Physicians of the Islamic Golden Age, such as Avicenna, Ibn Sina, incorporated bathing, oils, and dietary balance into their medical practices. Cleanliness was seen as essential for preventing illness, aiding recovery, and maintaining equilibrium in the body. The influence of Greek medical thought blended with Islamic teachings, creating a system where health and hygiene were inseparable. In urban life, the emphasis on purity shaped the design of homes and cities. Houses were built with fountains or basins for washing, and public fountains ensured that travelers and the poor could perform ablutions before prayer. In marketplaces, sellers washed their goods, and butchers cleaned their stalls. Water was everywhere, not only as necessity, but as symbol of civilization itself. The sight of flowing fountains, courtyards shaded with trees, and hammams steaming with heat reflected a society that placed purity at its core. If we imagine a day in a city like Damascus, the rhythm of cleanliness comes alive. At dawn, men and women rise to wash before prayer, rinsing their faces and hands with cool water. Merchants pause during the day to perform wudu, carefully washing at fountains near the mosque. In the afternoon, groups head to the hammam, where steam fills the air, attendants scrub and massage, and laughter echoes off tiled walls. Afterward, people emerge into the streets refreshed, perfumed with rose oil, their skin glowing in the evening light. The hum of life continues, but always with the undercurrent of ritual purity. The Islamic approach to hygiene left a deep imprint on history. As Islamic civilization spread across North Africa, the Middle East, and into Europe through Spain, Its emphasis on washing and cleanliness influenced other cultures. The hammam became a fixture from Cairo to Cordoba, from Istanbul to Marrakesh. Even today, many of these bathhouses survive, their steam and tiles carrying echoes of a tradition centuries old. At its core, the Islamic world taught that to be clean was to be close to God, to show respect for oneself and others, and to live in harmony with divine order. Cleanliness was never optional or trivial. It was faith in action. As our journey continues, we will see how this emphasis contrasted with the shifting attitudes in medieval Europe. There, the decline of Roman baths, the rise of new beliefs, and the fear of disease reshaped how people thought about water and washing. Chapter 9. Medieval Europe. Bathhouses, fear of water, and dry washing as the grandeur of Rome faded and the medieval world took shape. Attitudes toward hygiene in Europe shifted dramatically. The vast bathhouses that had once symbolized Roman life crumbled into ruins. Aqueducts fell silent, and the daily rhythm of communal bathing was largely forgotten. What replaced it was a more complicated, and at times contradictory, relationship with cleanliness, one shaped by fear, faith, and survival. In the early Middle Ages, remnants of Roman bathing culture lingered. In some towns, smaller bathhouses survived, and people still valued washing as a way of refreshing the body. But as political instability grew and urban infrastructure collapsed, many communities lost easy access to fresh water and reliable sanitation. The grand supply systems of Rome could not be maintained, and with them went the widespread availability of regular bathing. Still, medieval people were not as dirty as stereotypes often suggest. In monasteries, for example, cleanliness was valued. Monks washed their hands before meals and maintained some form of bathing routine, especially on holy days. Documents from abbeys record the construction of simple baths and washing areas. For peasants, rivers and streams remained sources of water for bathing, though much depended on the season and the availability of clean water. The idea of cleanliness, however, took on new meanings. In a world deeply shaped by Christian belief, purity was often measured more in spiritual than physical terms. To wash the body was good, but to cleanse the soul through confession and prayer was greater. The Church taught that inner purity mattered most, and this spiritual emphasis sometimes reduced the importance placed on frequent bathing. By the later Middle Ages, another factor began to shape hygiene practices: fear of water itself. Medical theories of the time suggested that warm baths opened the pores of the skin, making the body vulnerable to disease. This belief grew especially strong during outbreaks of plague and other epidemics. Doctors advised avoiding baths, warning that water could carry miasmas or harmful airs that seeped into the body. As a result, many people turned to what might be called dry washing. Instead of immersing in water, they used cloths to wipe the body, sprinkled themselves with powders, or rubbed the skin with vinegar or aromatic substances. Clothing, too, became a substitute for cleanliness. Changing into a fresh set of linen was thought to absorb dirt and sweat from the body, meaning that laundering clothes became a form of hygiene even when the body itself was not washed as often. Public bathhouses still existed in many medieval towns, especially in places like Paris, London, and German cities. These establishments offered hot baths, often in large wooden tubs, and were popular gathering spots. But over time, they developed reputations not just for bathing, but for social activities that blurred into vice gambling, drinking, and sometimes prostitution. As moral suspicion of bathhouses grew and fears of disease increased, authorities began closing them. By the 16th century, many public baths had disappeared from European cities. Perfumes and scented waters became important substitutes for bathing. The wealthy sprinkled rose water or lavender on their clothes, carried pomanders filled with spices, or burned incense to mask odors. For the poor, herbs and vinegar washes served similar purposes. People were not indifferent to smells. They simply had different ways of addressing them when water was seen as dangerous. Hair and dental care followed similar patterns. Combs were widely used, both to arrange hair and to remove lice. Teeth were rubbed with cloth, powders of crushed herbs, or even ashes. Mouthwashes made of vinegar and spices were common among those who could afford them. Hygiene was still a daily concern, but it looked very different from the water-rich traditions of Rome, or the ritual ablutions of the Islamic world. If we picture a medieval household, the scene is humbler but not devoid of care. A peasant family might wash their hands and faces with water drawn from a well, especially before meals. On special days, or in summer months, they might bathe in a stream. A wealthier family in a town might use a wooden tub in their home, filling it with heated water carried from the kitchen. Bathing was often a special event rather than a daily routine, involving preparation and effort. At the same time, ideas of modesty influenced bathing practices. Mixed bathing, once common in Roman times, became frowned upon. Separate bathing hours for men and women were enforced in some towns, while in other places, public bathing was discouraged altogether. The notion that washing the body too often might be vain or morally suspect also colored medieval attitudes. Yet despite all these complexities, Europeans did not abandon the idea of cleanliness. They simply redefined it. To change linens, to wipe the skin with cloths, to comb the hair and sprinkle perfumes, these were all ways of maintaining a sense of hygiene within the boundaries of their beliefs and fears. Even the poorest families valued being presentable, especially for church or communal gatherings. Cleanliness, in whatever form, remained tied to dignity and respect. The contradictions of medieval hygiene are striking. On the one hand, physicians warned against baths, and public bathhouses declined. On the other, religious orders maintained strict rules for washing, and communities still valued freshness and grooming. People feared water, yet relied on it. They distrusted bathing, yet sought other ways to feel clean. The medieval world reminds us that hygiene is never only about dirt, it is also about belief, culture, and the challenges of the time. As we leave this world of shifting attitudes, we move deeper into the medieval imagination, where monks and nuns pursued their own unique approaches to cleanliness. For them, washing could be both a spiritual duty and a form of denial, a practice that reflected the tension between caring for the body and mortifying it. Their story reveals yet another layer of how people, long before soap, sought to live in purity. Chapter 10. Monks, Nuns, and Religious Hygiene Practices in Medieval Europe. Monasteries and convents stood apart as islands of order and devotion in a changing world. Behind their stone walls, men and women dedicated their lives to prayer, discipline, and service. But how did these religious communities approach hygiene? The answer is complex, for the practices of monks and nuns reveal both devotion to cleanliness and a willingness to endure discomfort, depending on how they interpreted the meaning of purity. For monks, daily life was governed by strict rules. The Rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century, became the foundation for many monastic communities. This rule did not ignore physical cleanliness. It instructed monks to wash their hands before meals, to bathe at certain times of year, and to care for the sick with attention to hygiene. Monasteries often included washhouses, latrines, and even primitive bathing facilities. In some cases, monks were allowed full baths 4 times a year, though hand and foot washing occurred more regularly. Yet bathing was not only about health. For monks, it carried moral weight. Washing the body was seen as preparing the soul for prayer, much as washing before entering a church prepared one to stand before God. Clean hands and faces symbolized inner purity. In this sense, hygiene was never separate from faith. It was a form of devotion. Nuns followed similar routines. Convents provided places for washing, and rules encouraged cleanliness before meals, prayer, and caring for the sick. At the same time, modesty was emphasized. Bathing was done privately, with an awareness that the body was to be respected, not flaunted. The image of the nun with neatly kept habits, clean hands, and orderly hair was part of showing discipline and reverence. But there was another side to religious hygiene: asceticism, the deliberate denial of comfort. Some monks and nuns believed that the body was a source of temptation and weakness. To mortify the flesh was to strengthen the soul. In this spirit, certain holy men and women chose to bathe rarely, if at all. Dirt and discomfort were embraced as signs of humility, suffering, and closeness to Christ, who himself endured hardship. Accounts of saints describe hermits who wore the same clothing for years, their skin blackened by dirt, yet admired for their holiness. This tension between caring for the body and denying it ran through much of monastic life. On one hand, monasteries were often healthier than surrounding villages, thanks to their emphasis on washing, sanitation, and order. On the other, some religious figures glorified neglect of hygiene as a spiritual discipline. To be dirty could mean to be holy, provided it was endured for the sake of God. Still, practical cleanliness was unavoidable in a community setting. Monks and nuns lived together, ate together, and prayed together. Without some attention to hygiene, illness would spread quickly. Latrines were carefully constructed, often flushed by diverted streams. Washhouses allowed for rinsing of hands and clothes. Laundering was a regular task, ensuring that garments were kept fresh, even if the body beneath them was not always washed. The care of the sick also brought hygiene to the forefront. Monasteries served as hospitals, tending to the ill and the poor. Here, washing was essential. Bathing patients, cleaning wounds, and maintaining fresh linens were acts of mercy and health. In this way, religious devotion and practical hygiene worked hand in hand, showing that cleanliness could be both a spiritual and a charitable act. Hair care held special meaning in monastic life. Monks shaved their heads in a style called the tonsure, leaving a circle of hair as a sign of humility. Nuns cut their hair short on taking vows, removing vanity and dedicating themselves fully to spiritual service. These acts symbolized attachment for worldly beauty, yet they also kept hair manageable and clean. Grooming, in this sense, was both symbolic and hygienic. If we imagine a day in a monastery, the rhythm is steady and disciplined. At dawn, the monks rise for prayer, washing their hands and faces before entering the chapel. After labor in the fields, they rinse again before sharing a meal in silence. In the afternoon, some may launder clothes in the washhouse, scrubbing with water drawn from the stream that runs past the walls. In the evening, they gather once more for prayer, their bodies weary, but their spirits disciplined. Cleanliness is present, but always with the reminder that the soul is the true focus. In a convent, the day unfolds with similar order. Nuns tend to gardens, care for orphans or the sick, and prepare food. Between these tasks, they wash, comb their hair, and keep their garments in good order. Their appearance reflects their devotion neat, modest, and disciplined. Yet within the same convent, there may be sisters who embrace ascetic extremes, avoiding baths, fasting heavily, or wearing rough garments against the skin. Together, these practices reflect the spectrum of how religious women approach the balance of body and spirit. The writings of medieval chroniclers show that outsiders sometimes admired monastic cleanliness and order, contrasting it with the less structured lives of peasants. Others, however, were astonished by the willingness of holy men and women to endure filth for the sake of faith. Both perspectives reveal how strongly religious life influenced perceptions of hygiene in the medieval world. The legacy of monastic hygiene is significant. By preserving practices of washing, sanitation, and medical care, monasteries helped carry ancient knowledge through centuries when much of Europe struggled with disorder. At the same time, the ascetic ideal shaped spiritual traditions that valued inner purity over outward appearance. Together, These strands show that cleanliness in religious life was never one thing but many a blend of care, symbolism, denial, and devotion. As we leave the cloisters of monasteries and convents, we step back into the wider medieval world, where ordinary people turned to the resources at hand to keep clean. Without soap, they relied on ashes, vinegar, herbs, and countless other household substitutes. Their ingenuity shows us once again how human beings, across all circumstances, found ways to meet the timeless need for hygiene. Chapter 11. Folk Remedies and Household Substitutes. Long before soap became an everyday staple, ordinary people across the world turned to the simple resources around them to meet their need for cleanliness. For peasants and townsfolk who lacked the wealth for perfumes, exotic oils, or the luxury of bathhouses, hygiene was a matter of ingenuity and practicality. The result was a wide array of folk remedies and household substitutes, methods that might seem strange to us today, but were once trusted ways to stay clean. One of the most common substitutes was ash. Wood ash, plentiful from daily cooking fires, contained alkaline salts that could cut through grease and dirt. Mixed with water, ash formed a gritty paste that worked as a scrub for the skin. Some families boiled ash with animal fats, unintentionally producing crude forms of soap long before it became a commercial product. Others simply rubbed ash directly onto the body or used it to scour cooking pots and laundry, treating human skin and household goods in much the same way. Vinegar was another favorite. Its sharp, acidic quality made it a useful cleanser and deodorizer. People used vinegar to rinse their hands, wash their faces, and even freshen breath. A cloth soaked in vinegar could be rubbed over the skin to cut through sweat and odors. In some regions, vinegar was mixed with herbs to create refreshing washes, combining practical cleansing with pleasant scents. Herbs played a large role in folk hygiene. Families gathered lavender, rosemary, sage, and mint to use in washing water. These plants added fragrance and were believed to ward off illness. Bundles of herbs might be hung in homes or steeped in hot water for bathing. In colder months, dried herbs provided simple powders that could be sprinkled on the body or clothing, masking odors when bathing was less frequent. Sand and clay also served as cleansers. In regions where water was scarce, people rubbed fine sand or clay on their skin, scrubbing away sweat and oils before brushing it off. Clay, in particular, absorbed grease and left the skin feeling smoother. These methods may sound uncomfortable, but they were effective in their own way, and they required nothing more than the earth beneath one's feet. Wine and beer, surprisingly, sometimes entered the realm of hygiene. A little stale wine might be poured over the hands as a quick cleanser, the alcohol and acidity offering a rudimentary disinfectant. Beer, too, was occasionally used to rinse the hair, giving it shine and fragrance. Such practices blurred the line between luxury and necessity, as households repurposed whatever was available. Laundry provided another example of folk ingenuity. Before commercial soap powders, clothes were cleaned with lye, a strong liquid obtained by leaching water through ashes. Laundresses soaked garments in lye, scrubbed them on boards, and rinsed them in streams. This same lye solution could be applied sparingly to the body, though its harshness limited its use. For most, simple water, ash, and vigorous scrubbing sufficed. Dental care, too, drew on household resources. People chewed twigs from fragrant trees to clean their teeth, or used powders of crushed charcoal, salt, or eggshells. These abrasives removed debris, and when mixed with herbs, freshened the breath. In some cultures, ashes from burnt bread or bones were used in tooth-cleaning powders, creating gritty mixtures that scoured the teeth effectively, if not gently. Hair care varied widely, but was rarely neglected. Combs were common, made from wood, bone, or horn, and they served both to style hair and remove lice. To wash hair, People sometimes used herbal rinses or simply water mixed with vinegar. Oils, when available, were rubbed into the scalp to keep hair manageable. In rural areas where luxuries were scarce, people might rely on nothing more than frequent combing and occasional rinses to keep hair in order. Smells, always a concern, were addressed with powders, herbs, and perfumes when possible. Women carried small pouches of dried flowers, pressing them to their noses in crowded streets. Men rubbed their hands with rosemary or sage before entering gatherings. Clothes were scented by placing lavender or mint in storage chests, so that garments carried fresh aromas even when the body beneath had not bathed for some time. Children, too, were subject to these practices. Mothers wiped them down with cloths dipped in vinegar, rubbed them with oils or ash, and combed their hair carefully to keep lice at bay. Infants were swaddled in cloths that were washed with lye or ash, and herbal powders were sometimes applied to their skin to prevent rashes. Hygiene, though humble, was a family affair, passed down in simple routines that required little beyond what could be gathered from fields and kitchens. Folk remedies also reflected beliefs about health and protection. People often thought that certain herbs not only cleaned, but also warded off evil spirits or disease. Sage might be burned in homes to purify the air. Mint carried in pockets was said to prevent illness. Washing with water infused with holy herbs was thought to cleanse both body and soul. Hygiene was never purely physical. It was bound up with the mystical and the medicinal. If we imagine a cottage in medieval Europe, the picture is modest but vivid. A family gathers water from the well. The mother stirs ashes into a bucket, dipping cloths to wipe down the children. A pot of vinegar stands ready on the shelf, used for cooking, cleaning, and refreshing the body. Herbs hang drying from the rafters, their scent mingling with the smoke from the hearth. On laundry day, clothes are boiled with lye and pounded against stones by the river. Though soap is unknown in this home, cleanliness is pursued through countless small acts, woven into the rhythm of daily life. These humble methods remind us that hygiene has never depended on luxury. While kings and queens perfumed themselves with rare oils, ordinary people managed with ashes, herbs, and earth. Their practices may seem rough, but they reveal resilience and creativity. With little at hand, they found ways to keep themselves and their families refreshed, fragrant, and dignified. The story of folk remedies also reminds us that the line between cleanliness and medicine was thin. A rinse of vinegar might serve both to freshen and to prevent infection. Herbs soothed the body even as they scented it. Ash cleaned garments as well as wounds. In this overlap, we see how hygiene and healing were once inseparable, part of the same struggle to endure and to thrive without the comforts of modern life. As we continue our journey, we will shift from these household remedies to more specific aspects of hygiene, the care of teeth, hair, and breath. These details may seem small, but they reveal much about how people understood health and beauty long before the invention of soap. Chapter 12: Teeth, Breath, and Hair. Hygiene beyond the bath. When we think of personal hygiene, bathing often comes first to mind. Yet long before soap and showers became common, people also cared for other parts of the body, especially the teeth, the breath, and the hair. These details of grooming might seem secondary, but they were essential to how people looked, felt, and presented themselves to others. Across cultures and centuries, we find inventive methods of caring for the mouth and scalp, often blending practical needs with ritual, belief, and even beauty. Teeth were one of the earliest concerns. Archaeologists have found evidence of toothpicks as far back as prehistoric times, small slivers of bone or wood used to remove food from between the teeth. Clean teeth were not only more comfortable, but also a sign of refinement. In many societies, bad breath or visible decay carried social stigma, so people sought ways to maintain freshness. In ancient India, chewing sticks were widely used. Sticks cut from neem, licorice, or other medicinal trees were chewed until the ends frayed into brush-like fibers. These acted as natural toothbrushes, cleaning the teeth while releasing antibacterial compounds. Ayurveda recommended them not only for hygiene, but also for balancing the body's health. This practice spread widely, influencing later cultures and surviving even into modern times in parts of Asia and Africa. The Islamic world, too, valued dental hygiene. The miswak, a twig from the arak tree, became a daily tool for cleaning the teeth. Its fibers contained natural antiseptics, and its use was considered both practical and religious, since the Prophet Muhammad encouraged it. The miswak became so integral to hygiene that travelers carried it alongside their most basic possessions. In Europe, people used powders to clean their teeth. Crushed eggshells, burnt bread, or powdered herbs were rubbed on with cloth or small sticks. Charcoal was another favorite, its gritty texture scouring away debris. While these methods were effective to some extent, they could also be harsh, wearing down enamel over time. Yet they reflect a clear desire to maintain dental cleanliness long before toothpaste existed. Mouthwashes were also common. Vinegar, wine, or herbal infusions were swished to freshen the breath. Parsley and mint were chewed after meals to mask odors. In elite households, spices like cloves or cinnamon might be used, their strong aromas signaling wealth as much as cleanliness. To greet others with fresh breath was to show courtesy and refinement, a small but meaningful detail in daily interactions. Hair care, too, was a central concern across cultures. Hair was often seen as a symbol of vitality, identity, and even spirituality. To neglect it was to appear disordered, while to maintain it reflected dignity and self-respect. Ancient Egyptians, for example, shaved their heads and wore wigs, which were carefully perfumed and kept clean with oils. Greeks and Romans oiled and combed their hair, styling it to reflect status and beauty. In India and China, oiling the hair was a cherished tradition. Coconut, sesame, or camellia oil was massaged into the scalp, strengthening the hair and giving it a glossy appearance. Combing was done with care, often as a family ritual, and perfumes or flowers were sometimes added. These practices were not only hygienic but soothing, bringing relaxation and a sense of order. Medieval Europe faced different challenges. Lice were common, and combs were essential tools to manage them. Wooden or bone combs were used daily, sometimes boiled in vinegar to kill pests. Hair was often washed with water infused with herbs like rosemary or nettles, believed to cleanse and strengthen it. Vinegar rinses added shine, while ashes or clays could absorb grease. Even in times when full bathing was rare, hair care remained a daily necessity. Shaving and grooming varied by culture. Some societies valued smooth, hairless bodies, while others celebrated long beards and elaborate hairstyles. In Islamic culture, shaving the armpits and trimming the mustache were recommended as acts of cleanliness. In Christian monasteries, the tonsure shaving part of the scalp was a sign of humility and discipline. Hairstyles, then, were not only about beauty, but also about spiritual identity. Children's grooming reflected the same values. Mothers carefully combed their children's hair, rubbed their gums with herbal powders, and wiped their faces with cloths dipped in vinegar or scented water. These small acts were part of nurturing, teaching the young how to maintain cleanliness even with limited resources. If we imagine a medieval household, the scene comes alive. After supper, the family sits by the hearth. A father picks food from his teeth with a small wooden pick. A mother rubs her teeth with a powder of salt and herbs. The children chew parsley leaves to freshen their breath. Nearby, hair is combed, oil rubbed into the scalp, and stray lice flicked away into the fire. These small rituals, repeated day after day, maintain dignity in a world without soap, toothpaste, or shampoo. The social meaning of grooming was profound. To arrive with unkempt hair or foul breath was to risk embarrassment. To appear clean and orderly was to show respect to others and to oneself. Grooming was, in this sense, a form of communication, signaling care, discipline, and readiness for social life. Perfume and powders added a finishing touch. Women dusted their hair with scented powders, while men rubbed oils into their beards. Even the poor, who lacked such luxuries, improvised with herbs from the fields, ensuring that some trace of freshness accompanied them into the marketplace or church. The effort to present oneself well was universal, transcending class and wealth. What is striking about these practices is their continuity across time and place. Whether in the chewing sticks of India, the miswak of Arabia, the herbal rinses of Europe, or the perfumed oils of Egypt, people everywhere found ways to care for teeth, breath, and hair. They remind us that hygiene is not only about health, but also about identity and belonging. As we move forward in our journey, we will see how the concern with smell itself became a defining feature of hygiene. In a world where daily bathing was not always possible, perfumes, powders, and the art of covering odors shaped how people understood cleanliness. This next chapter reveals how scent became its own form of hygiene, masking, transforming, and redefining what it meant to be clean. Chapter 13: Perfume, Powder, and Covering Smells. In the absence of daily bathing and soap, one of the most important strategies for personal hygiene throughout history was not removing odors, but covering them. Scent became a form of cleanliness, a way to mask the natural smells of the human body and transform them into something socially acceptable, even desirable. Perfumes, powders, and aromatic waters played a central role in this delicate balance between what was natural and what was considered refined. The fascination with fragrance goes back thousands of years. In ancient Egypt, perfumes were prepared from resins, oils, and flowers. They were worn on the body, burned as incense, and offered to the gods. Scent was considered divine, elevating both the living and the dead. The Greeks and Romans continued this tradition, importing perfumes from far-off lands and using them lavishly in banquets, baths, and daily grooming. By the Middle Ages and early modern period, perfume had become not only a luxury, but also a necessity, particularly in Europe, where bathing had fallen out of favor. In medieval towns and cities, strong odors filled the air. Streets were crowded, waste disposal was crude, and people often went long periods without full bathing. To cope, both rich and poor turned to scent. The wealthy had access to distilled floral waters, rose water, lavender water, orange blossom that were sprinkled on the hands, clothing, or even poured into basins for washing. These waters refreshed the skin and left behind pleasant aromas, softening the reality of daily life. For those of humbler means, herbs served a similar purpose. Lavender, rosemary, and mint were rubbed between the hands or carried in pouches to mask smells. Women tucked sprigs of herbs into their bodices or hair, while men rubbed their hands with aromatic leaves before attending gatherings. The scent did not last long, but it provided enough freshness to make a difference in social settings. Powders added another layer to this fragrant strategy, made from crushed herbs, flowers, and sometimes ground spices. Powders were sprinkled on the hair, skin, and clothing. In elite households, hair was often dusted with perfumed powder, which both deodorized and absorbed oils. Clothing stored in chests was layered with herbs to ensure garments smelled fresh even when bodies did not. These practices created a fragrant barrier between the individual and the odors of everyday life. The rise of pomanders in the later Middle Ages and Renaissance reflected both fear and fascination with scent. A pomander was a small container, often of metal or carved wood, filled with aromatic substances like cloves, musk, ambergris, or rosemary. Worn around the neck or carried in the hand, it was believed not only to mask unpleasant smells, but also to protect against disease. The theory of miasma, bad air, as the cause of illness meant that fragrance was thought to purify the air itself. To breathe in pleasant aromas, was to safeguard one's health. Perfume reached new heights during the Renaissance and Baroque periods. In courts like those of France and Italy, scent became a marker of refinement and fashion. Nobles drenched their gloves, clothing, and wigs with perfume. Rooms were filled with bowls of rosewater, and courtiers carried ornate flasks of fragrance. Bathing remained infrequent, so perfume did the heavy lifting in presenting an image of cleanliness. To smell sweet was to be considered clean, elegant, and civilized. Even outside the courts, perfumes and powders shaped daily life. Apothecaries sold scented waters, and recipes circulated for making them at home. Distillation techniques improved, allowing for more concentrated and varied fragrances. People experimented with combinations of herbs, spices, and flowers, blending local plants with exotic imports like cinnamon, nutmeg, and musk. The pursuit of fragrance was not just about hygiene, but about artistry and pleasure. At the same time, the social meaning of perfume could be complicated. Some religious authorities criticized excessive use of scent, associating it with vanity, indulgence, or moral laxity. A person who wore too much perfume might be seen as masking not only physical odor, but also spiritual corruption. Moderation was praised, but entirely abandoning fragrance was rare, since the practical need to manage smells was so strong. Smell also shaped social spaces. In churches, incense filled the air, linking fragrance with holiness. In homes, herbs were burned to sweeten the rooms. In hospitals, aromatic plants were scattered on floors to counteract the stench of sickness. Smell became a form of control, transforming environments as much as individuals. If we imagine a European court in the 17th century, the role of perfume becomes vivid. A noblewoman enters a grand hall, her gown powdered with scented starch, her hair dusted with rose-scented powder. A pomander swings from her belt, releasing a subtle fragrance of clove and amber. Around her, courtiers exchange perfumed gloves, kiss cheeks scented with lavender, and converse in a room where incense smolders. Few of them have bathed recently, but the atmosphere is thick with aromas that suggest refinement and cleanliness. Among common folk, the scene is simpler but just as telling. A farmer sprinkles vinegar mixed with rosemary on his hands before attending church. A mother hangs lavender in the linen chest, ensuring her family's clothes smell fresh. Children chew parsley leaves to sweeten their breath before school. In all these acts, fragrance is a tool of dignity, helping people present themselves as clean and respectable, even when bathing was rare. What makes these practices remarkable is their continuity across centuries. From the cones of perfumed fat in Egypt to the scented oils of Greece, the pomanders of medieval Europe, and the perfumes of Versailles, humans consistently turned to scent to bridge the gap between hygiene and social expectation. Smell was not merely an accessory. It was central to how people defined cleanliness itself. The reliance on perfume and powder also reveals a deeper truth, that hygiene has always been as much about perception as about reality. A person who smelled fresh was considered clean, regardless of when they last bathed. The illusion of cleanliness was often enough to meet social standards, showing how much of hygiene is cultural rather than strictly biological. As we move forward in our journey, we will leave the courts of Europe and turn to the New World, where indigenous peoples developed their own remarkable traditions of cleanliness. From sweat lodges to herbal washes, their practices reveal yet another way humans found to refresh the body and renew the spirit, long before soap shaped modern habits. Chapter 14. Hygiene in the New World. When Europeans first set foot in the Americas, they encountered peoples whose approaches to cleanliness were both practical and deeply spiritual. Indigenous communities across North and South America had developed their own traditions of hygiene, shaped by their environments and beliefs. These practices often impressed, and sometimes puzzled, the newcomers, who carried their own assumptions about what it meant to be clean. Among many Native American groups, water was central. Rivers, lakes, and springs were seen not only as sources of life, but as places of renewal. Daily washing was common, whether to rinse away dirt, cool the body, or prepare for rituals. Bathing was rarely a luxury. It was part of the rhythm of life. Some groups bathed communally in rivers at dawn, the cool water believed to strengthen the body and sharpen the spirit for the day's work. One of the most striking traditions was the sweat lodge. Found in many cultures across North America, the sweat lodge was a small enclosed structure, often made of branches covered with hides or earth. Inside, heated stones were doused with water to create steam. Participants sat together in the intense heat, sweating profusely as songs, prayers, and rituals unfolded. The sweat lodge was both physical and spiritual. It cleansed the body of impurities, but it also purified the soul, preparing participants for ceremonies, healing, or visions. Emerging from the lodge, people often plunged into cold rivers or snow, completing the cycle of heat and renewal. In South America, too, traditions of cleansing were tied to nature. Among the Amazonian peoples, bathing in rivers was a daily practice. Herbs and plant-based infusions were sometimes added to the water or rubbed on the skin, both for fragrance and for protection against insects. Among the Andean peoples, bathing in hot springs carried ritual significance, linking the warmth of the earth with healing powers. The natural landscape offered abundant ways to refresh the body, and indigenous peoples wove these gifts into their culture. Hygiene was also connected to grooming. Hair care, for instance, was widely valued. Combing and braiding were common, and oils or plant extracts were applied to keep hair healthy and glossy. Feathers, beads, and other ornaments were woven into hairstyles, transforming grooming into both hygiene and art. Clean, orderly hair was a sign of dignity and belonging, just as it was in many other parts of the world. Dental care also held importance. Some groups used fiber sticks to clean their teeth, while others chewed fragrant leaves to freshen the breath. In regions where certain minerals were available, people used gritty powders as tooth cleansers. The desire for fresh breath and clean teeth was universal, showing once again that these small details of hygiene mattered across cultures. Clothing, too, was part of hygiene. Garments made from animal hides or woven fibers were regularly cleaned, sometimes with ash or sand, sometimes by simple rinsing in streams. Fresh clothing was associated with renewal, just as in Europe, though the methods of care differed. In colder climates, clothing also served as protection against sweat and odor, requiring regular airing and cleaning. Spiritual beliefs gave these practices deeper meaning. For many indigenous peoples, the body was not separate from the spirit, but a reflection of it. To be dirty or unkempt was to risk imbalance, while to be clean was to show respect to oneself, to the community, and to the natural world. Bathing before ceremonies or important gatherings was a form of preparation, ensuring that one approached the sacred in a state of purity. European observers often commented on these customs, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with misunderstanding. Early explorers noted that many indigenous groups bathed far more frequently than Europeans of the same period. In some cases, they even criticized native peoples for bathing too much, reflecting the European fear that frequent washing might weaken the body. Yet over time, some Europeans came to appreciate and even adopt aspects of indigenous hygiene, especially the use of herbal remedies and the refreshing power of sweat baths. The role of fragrance also appears in these traditions. While indigenous peoples may not have distilled perfumes in the European sense, they valued the scents of plants, resins, and smokes. Burning sage, cedar, or sweetgrass was both a cleansing act and a spiritual one, purifying spaces and people alike. The line between physical freshness and sacred protection was blurred, reminding us that hygiene was always about more than the body alone. If we imagine a day in one of these communities, the scene is vivid. At dawn, families walk together to the river, the air cool and mist rising from the water. Children splash and laugh while adults immerse themselves quietly, offering prayers as they bathe. Later, a sweat lodge is prepared. Stones are heated until they glow, then carried into the darkened lodge. Inside, steam rises, chants echo, and bodies glisten in the heat. Emerging, the participants plunge into the river, gasping at the cold, feeling reborn. Hair is combed and braided, herbs rubbed on the skin, and the day continues with a sense of renewal. These practices reveal resilience and wisdom. Without soap, shampoos, or modern conveniences, indigenous peoples developed hygiene systems that were effective, meaningful, and sustainable. They used the resources of their environment, water, herbs, stones, smoke, to keep themselves clean and connected to the rhythms of nature. The legacy of these traditions continues. Sweat lodges remain important in native communities today, serving as places of healing and ceremony. Sage, cedar, and sweetgrass are still burned in rituals of purification. Bathing in rivers and springs continues as both a physical and spiritual act. These practices remind us that cleanliness is not only about science, but also about belonging to land, to community, and to the unseen world. As we move from the New World back to Europe, we will see how hygiene began to change once again. In the early modern period, new ideas about private bathing, scented waters, and household cleanliness began to reshape daily life, laying the groundwork for the eventual return of soap and the modern bathroom. Chapter 15. Early Modern Europe. From bathhouses to bedrooms. By the dawn of the early modern period, Europe was undergoing a profound transformation. Cities were growing, trade was expanding, and science was beginning to challenge old beliefs. Yet when it came to hygiene, the story remained a complicated one. The grand bathhouses of Rome were long gone, and the medieval suspicion of water lingered. But slowly, new habits were emerging, habits that brought cleanliness from the public square into the privacy of the home. Public bathhouses had fallen out of favor by the 16th century. Fear of disease, particularly plague, made many suspicious of shared bathing spaces. Authorities in cities like Paris and London closed public baths, convinced that they were breeding grounds for contagion or dens of immorality. With their decline, people turned to more private methods of cleaning. Instead of communal bathing, small tubs in the home became more common, though these were often used only occasionally, since hauling and heating water was a laborious task. In wealthier households, bathing began to take on a more ritualized, luxurious character. Wooden or metal tubs were set up in bedrooms or kitchens, lined with cloth for comfort. Servants poured heated water into them, sometimes infused with herbs or scented oils. Bathers reclined as the water cooled and dried themselves with linen. This was not a daily practice, but when it was done, it became a special occasion, blending comfort, fragrance, and novelty. For most people, however, full-body bathing remained rare. Instead, cleanliness was pursued through partial washing. The face, hands, and feet were washed daily, often with basins of water kept in the bedroom. Linen undergarments were changed frequently, absorbing sweat and dirt. Since laundering was easier than bathing, clean linens became a substitute for a clean body. The crispness of freshly washed fabric was seen as proof of hygiene, even if the skin beneath was not often scrubbed. Perfumed waters gained popularity in this period, especially among the upper classes. Distilled floral waters, rose water, lavender water, orange blossom were sprinkled on clothes, wiped across the skin, and poured into wash basins. They refreshed the body, masked odors, and signaled refinement. Wealthy women carried small flasks of scented water, ready to dab their wrists or handkerchiefs. Men perfumed their gloves, coats, and even wigs, surrounding themselves in clouds of fragrance. Cosmetics and powders also shaped perceptions of cleanliness. Hair was powdered with starch scented with lavender or orange. Faces were dusted with white powders, giving an appearance of smoothness and elegance. Perfumed fans wafted freshness in crowded halls, while pomanders, small containers filled with spices and resins, were carried to guard against unpleasant smells. The illusion of cleanliness was as important as the reality, and scent became a language of hygiene all its own. Medical ideas also influenced hygiene practices. Physicians warned against full bathing, believing that soaking in water weakened the body. They recommended instead wiping the skin with cloths soaked in wine, vinegar, or aromatic waters. These methods were thought to close the pores and protect against disease, while still offering a sense of freshness. Washing the hands and face daily was encouraged, but immersing the entire body was approached with caution. Children's hygiene reflected these same patterns. Mothers wiped their children with cloths dipped in scented water, combed their hair carefully, and changed their linens often. Infants were swaddled in fabric, washed with lye or ash, and their skin was sometimes dusted with powders to keep it dry and sweet-smelling. These small acts formed the backbone of hygiene in households that lacked soap or plumbing. If we imagine a household in 17th century France, the scene is intimate. A basin of rosewater stands on a wooden table. A woman dips a cloth, wiping her face, neck, and hands. Her linen shift is freshly laundered, carrying the scent of lavender from the storage chest. A man perfumes his gloves before going out, the leather carrying a subtle fragrance of musk. Their children are dressed in clean linens, their hair combed and sprinkled with herbal powder. No one has bathed fully in weeks, yet the family feels refreshed and presentable, embodying the era's idea of cleanliness. The contrast between rich and poor was striking. While nobles indulged in perfumed baths, the poor relied on rivers, wells, and the simplest of remedies. A peasant might bathe only a few times a year, usually in summer when water was warm. For the rest of the time, they washed hands and faces with cold water, changed their clothes when possible, and used herbs to mask odors. Yet even among the poor, the value of cleanliness was recognized. To appear at church or a gathering in dirty garments was a mark of shame. Cultural differences also shaped hygiene. In some regions of Europe, bathing traditions persisted longer than in others. In Scandinavia, for example, steam baths and saunas remained popular, carried on from ancient customs. In parts of Eastern Europe, public baths survived well into the modern period, influenced by both Byzantine and Islamic traditions. These regional variations remind us that Europe was never uniform in its approach to hygiene. By the 18th century, the tide was beginning to turn. Enlightenment thinkers began to reconsider old fears about bathing. Science slowly challenged the idea that water weakened the body, and physicians started to recognize its benefits. Writers praised the invigorating effects of cold baths, and swimming gained popularity as a form of exercise. The stage was being set for the return of soap and the rise of the modern bathroom. The early modern period shows us a world in transition. Cleanliness had moved inward, from public bathhouses to private bedrooms. Water was still used cautiously, but perfumes, powders, and fresh linens created an aura of hygiene. To be clean was to smell fresh, look orderly, and wear well-laundered garments. These practices may seem incomplete to us now, but they reflected the realities and beliefs of their time, bridging the gap between medieval suspicion and modern confidence. As we move forward, we come to the crucial turning point in the story, the slow rediscovery and refinement of soap. What had once been a rare and specialized substance began to spread, reshaping hygiene in ways that would eventually transform daily life forever. Chapter 16. The Slow Arrival of Soap. That simple bar we take for granted today as one of the longest and most curious histories of all hygiene tools. Its story stretches back to antiquity, yet for most of human history, it was not a common household item. It appeared in early forms, disappeared from daily life, and slowly resurfaced, refined, and reshaped, until it finally became the cornerstone of modern cleanliness. The earliest traces of soap-like substances can be found in Mesopotamia, where records from nearly 3,000 years before the Common Era ascribe mixtures of fats and ashes used not for bathing, but for cleaning wool and textiles. The sticky, alkaline concoction helped prepare fabrics for dyeing, showing that people understood its power as a cleanser long before they thought of using it on the body. The Romans, too, knew of soap. Some sources suggest that soap was named from Mount Sapo, where animal sacrifices left behind a mixture of ashes and fat that washed into a river and made clothes cleaner. Yet in Rome, soap was not central to bathing culture. Romans preferred oil and strigils to cleanse the skin, while soap was considered more suitable for laundry or medicinal purposes. Even when knowledge of soap existed, cultural habits made it unnecessary for personal hygiene. During the early Middle Ages, soap remained rare and was often produced by small workshops. Recipes called for animal fat combined with lye made from ashes. The result was a harsh, uneven substance useful, but far from the fragrant bars we know today. Soap was primarily a product for cleaning cloth and tools, not people. For most households, ash, vinegar, and water were still the everyday solutions for staying fresh. It was in the Islamic world that soap-making advanced significantly. By the 9th century, artisans in cities like Aleppo were producing hard soaps made from olive oil and alkali. These soaps were boiled, poured into molds, and left to cure, resulting in a durable, smooth product that could be cut into blocks and traded. Aleppo soap, often scented with laurel oil, became famous and was exported across the Mediterranean. It represents one of the first true ancestors of the modern bar of soap. As trade expanded, these techniques reached Europe. By the 12th century, soap-making centers had emerged in Italy, Spain, and later France. In Castile, olive oil formed the base for what became known as Castile soap, renowned for its purity and quality. These soaps were milder than earlier varieties, suitable for both laundry and personal use. Still, they remained expensive, produced by guilds, and accessible mainly to the wealthy. For the majority, ash and water continued to suffice. The slow spread of soap was shaped by economics as much as by culture. Soap required resources, animal fat or vegetable oils, ashes, and fuel for boiling. Producing it on a large scale demanded organization and skill. Guilds controlled recipes, and governments sometimes taxed soap heavily, recognizing its value as a commodity. In some regions, soap was even treated as a luxury item, its use a sign of refinement and wealth. By the Renaissance, soap had become associated with elegance. Nobles and merchants in cities like Venice or Marseille purchased fragrant soaps infused with herbs, flowers, or spices. Small cakes of scented soap were exchanged as gifts, carried in chests, or displayed as signs of sophistication. Yet even then, daily bathing was rare, and soap remained more a novelty than a necessity. The 17th and 18th centuries brought gradual change. As Enlightenment thinkers promoted cleanliness and physicians began to recommend bathing, soap's role expanded. In France, the soap-making industry flourished in Marseille, producing olive oil soaps that gained international fame. In England, new techniques improved consistency, and scented soaps became fashionable among the upper classes. Advertisements praised soap not only for cleanliness, but for beauty, linking hygiene with appearance in new ways. Still, soap remained out of reach for most ordinary people. High taxes on soap in countries like England made it costly, ensuring that peasants and laborers continued to rely on traditional methods, ash, vinegar, or dry washing with cloths. It was not until the 19th century, with industrialization and the reduction of taxes, that soap began to enter everyday life on a mass scale. The chemistry of soap also advanced. Scientists like Nicolas Leblanc and later Michel Eugène Chevreul studied the processes of saponification, the reaction between fat and alkali that produces soap. Their discoveries allowed for more efficient production, cheaper ingredients, and eventually, the rise of industrial soap factories. By the mid-19th century, companies were producing soap in large quantities, marketing it as an essential for health, morality, and modern living. Before this industrial revolution in soap making, however, its journey was long and uneven. For centuries, soap existed in the margins present known, but not widely used. It was a substance of workshops and markets, of trade and luxury, rather than a staple of homes. Its slow rise reminds us that what we consider essential today was once optional, even rare. If we imagine a scene in medieval or Renaissance Europe, the place of soap becomes clearer. In a wealthy merchant's home, a block of Castile soap rests on a shelf, used sparingly to wash fine linens or perhaps to scent a chamber. In a peasant's cottage, by contrast, there is no soap at all, only ashes mixed with water to scrub clothes and wipe down pots. The idea of lathering the body with soap is distant, unfamiliar, even unnecessary. The eventual triumph of soap was not simply a matter of invention. It required a shift in how people thought about cleanliness, disease, and daily habits. The rediscovery of bathing, the fear of contagion, and the growing value placed on personal appearance all combined to make soap relevant. When it finally entered homes on a large scale, it reshaped routines so completely that it became difficult to imagine life without it. As we close this chapter, we see soap on the edge of transformation, no longer just a craft, but on the cusp of becoming an industry. In the centuries to come, it would move from luxury to necessity, from small workshops to factory production, and from rare gift to household staple. But before we reach that point, we must pause to consider the strange and sometimes misguided ideas that surrounded hygiene along the way, beliefs that influenced how people washed or refused to wash for centuries. Chapter 17, Myths, Misconceptions, and Medical Advice. Throughout history, people have always cared about cleanliness, but their understanding of how the body worked and how diseases spread was often incomplete. Without the knowledge of germs, hygiene was shaped by theories, traditions, and superstitions that sometimes helped and sometimes misled. In this chapter, we step into a world of curious beliefs, well-intentioned but mistaken advice, and myths that guided people's daily routines before the age of modern science. One of the most enduring misconceptions was the belief in miasma, or bad air. For centuries, many thought that diseases came not from invisible microbes, but from foul odors. If the air smelled rotten or stagnant, it was believed to be poisonous. Cleanliness, therefore, was not about removing germs, but about surrounding oneself with pleasant scents to guard against illness. Perfumes, herbs, and incense were not merely luxuries, they were medicines in the battle against miasma. People carried pomanders filled with cloves or ambergris, scattered herbs on floors, and hung sweet-smelling plants in homes, all in the hope of keeping sickness at bay. Another common belief was that too much bathing was harmful. Physicians warned that warm water opened the pores, allowing disease to seep into the body. A vigorous bath might refresh, but it also left a person vulnerable. As a result, many avoided full bathing during times of plague or epidemic. Instead, they wiped the body with cloths soaked in vinegar or wine, which were thought to strengthen the skin and close the pores. For some, the less water the better. Linked to this was the idea that dirt itself could be protective. Some argued that a layer of grime shielded the skin, acting as a barrier against bad air. To wash too often was to strip away this defense. In certain religious traditions, enduring filth was even considered virtuous, a sign of humility and suffering. Holy men and women sometimes avoided bathing altogether, believing that caring too much for the body was a form of vanity. Medical texts offered an array of advice that today seems puzzling. In medieval Europe, physicians recommended washing the hands and face but discouraged immersing the entire body. Instead, they suggested rubbing the skin with linen cloths or powders. Hair might be dusted with herbs, while teeth could be cleaned with mixtures of ash, salt, or crushed bone. Some doctors believed that washing with wine or vinegar purified the body more effectively than water. Other cultures developed their own curious remedies. In some regions, urine was considered a useful cleanser, believed to whiten teeth, freshen the breath, or wash wounds. Its ammonia content may have had some cleaning effect, but the practice strikes us today as bizarre. Similarly, animal fats, clays, or even blood were occasionally recommended as skin treatments, blurring the line between medicine and hygiene. Superstitions shaped daily routines in subtle ways. In parts of Europe, it was thought unlucky to bathe on certain days of the week or at specific phases of the moon. Some believed that washing the head too often would weaken the mind, while washing the feet on the wrong day might invite illness. These ideas, though strange, reflect the anxiety people felt about health in a world where so much was uncertain. Not all advice was misguided. Many cultures emphasized the importance of washing before eating, before prayer, and after work. The value of clean hands and faces was widely recognized, even if the reasoning behind it was rooted in spiritual rather than scientific explanations. Herbal remedies, too, often had real benefits. Plants like sage, mint, and rosemary contained antibacterial properties, even if people did not understand why they worked. The blending of myth and practical observation created a patchwork of hygiene practices that sometimes succeeded despite the beliefs behind them. If we imagine a household in the 17th century, the influence of these misconceptions is clear. A family avoids bathing during a plague outbreak, fearing that water will invite sickness. Instead, they wipe themselves with vinegar cloths and carry pomanders filled with herbs. The children chew parsley to freshen their breath, while their parents hang lavender in the rooms. They believe these practices protect them from disease, even if the true culprits, fleas, rats, and microbes, remain invisible. In monasteries and convents, myths about bathing clashed with traditions of washing. Some monks washed regularly, following rules of cleanliness. Others embraced filth as a spiritual discipline, convinced that neglecting the body strengthened the soul. Pilgrims on the road believed that dirt from holy sites carried blessings, and so they wore their unwashed garments proudly. The tension between purity and dirtiness ran deep, with each view supported by its own logic. Across cultures, people also debated the connection between weather and washing. Cold water was thought to harden the body, while hot water softened it dangerously. Bathing in winter was often discouraged, as it was believed to weaken the lungs. In hot climates, however, bathing was seen as refreshing, but still risky if done excessively. Advice varied from region to region, but the underlying theme was the same. Moderation was key, and extremes could harm. Some medical authorities even linked cleanliness to social class. Nobles were encouraged to use perfumes, powders, and occasional baths, while peasants were often advised to remain hardy and avoid luxurious practices that might soften them. Cleanliness was, in this sense, political as well as medical, reinforcing ideas of order and hierarchy. Despite the strangeness of many of these beliefs, they remind us of a simple truth. People did the best they could with the knowledge they had. In a world without microscopes or germ theory, smells, sensations, and visible dirt were the guides for understanding health. If foul odors seem to bring sickness, then pleasant scents must bring protection. If water sometimes coincided with illness, then avoiding it seemed wise. These conclusions may have been wrong, but they were logical within the limits of the time. As we leave behind these myths and misconceptions, we stand at the threshold of modernity. The 18th and 19th centuries brought new discoveries in science, new confidence in bathing, and the industrial rise of soap. With plumbing, factories, and germ theory, hygiene would be transformed forever. But before we enter this new age, it is worth pausing to reflect on how long and winding the road has been from ashes and oils, to perfumes and powders, to beliefs both strange and sincere. Chapter 18. Toward the modern bathroom, by the late 18th and 19th centuries, the world was on the cusp of transformation. After centuries of relying on ashes, herbs, oils, and perfumes, people began to embrace new ideas of cleanliness that would look familiar to us today. Soap, plumbing, and scientific discoveries converged to create the modern bathroom, a space dedicated to the daily rituals of hygiene. But the road to this transformation was gradual, filled with both innovation and hesitation. The first step was the rediscovery of bathing. Enlightenment thinkers challenged old fears about water, encouraging people to see bathing as invigorating rather than dangerous. Cold baths, once thought harmful, were praised for their ability to strengthen the body. Swimming gained popularity as both exercise and recreation. By the 19th century, public bathhouses were reappearing in European cities, this time designed not for luxury, but for health and sanitation. Soap was central to this shift. As industrialization advanced, soap making moved from small workshops to large factories. New chemical processes, such as the Leblanc method for producing soda ash, made soap cheaper and more consistent. Companies in France, England, and beyond began producing soap on a scale never seen before. What had once been a luxury became affordable for ordinary families. By the mid-19th century, bars of soap were no longer exotic gifts, but everyday necessities stacked in homes across Europe and America. The marketing of soap also changed how people thought about hygiene. Advertisements linked soap to morality, health, and even patriotism. Cleanliness was portrayed as a duty. Clean children meant good mothers. Clean workers meant progress. And clean citizens meant a strong nation. Soap was not only about washing away dirt, it was about belonging to a modern, civilized world. Plumbing added another dimension. Cities invested in water supply systems, bringing running water into more homes. At first, only the wealthy could afford private bathrooms, with tubs, basins, and flush toilets. But gradually, as technology spread, even modest households gained access to water on demand. The bathroom became a distinct space, set apart from kitchens and bedrooms, dedicated entirely to hygiene. With it came new routines: daily washing, regular bathing, and eventually the expectation of soap at every sink. Science reinforced these changes. The discovery of germs in the 19th century revolutionized hygiene. Physicians like Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister demonstrated that invisible microbes caused disease and that cleanliness could prevent infection. Suddenly, washing with soap was no longer just about appearances or odors. It was about life and death. Hospitals adopted strict sanitation practices, and households followed suit. The belief in miasma faded, replaced by a new confidence in hygiene as a weapon against illness. These changes rippled through daily life. Schools taught children to wash their hands, brush their teeth, and bathe regularly. Factories produced not only soap, but also toothbrushes, combs, and powders, creating an entire industry of hygiene products. Perfume, once used to cover odors, became a complement to soap rather than a substitute. Cleanliness moved from the realm of luxury to expectation. The bathroom itself became a symbol of modernity. Tiles, porcelain tubs, and shiny faucets replaced wooden tubs and basins. Mirrors invited daily grooming, while shelves filled with soap, towels, and toiletries reflected a new culture of self-care. What had once been rare, a private space for washing, was now a standard part of the home. Yet even in this era of progress, echoes of older traditions remained. People still used herbal rinses for hair, powders for freshness, and oils for the skin. Vinegar and lemon water were recommended for whitening teeth, while perfumes continued to shape social identity. The difference was that these older practices now existed alongside rather than in place of soap and plumbing. Hygiene became a layered system, blending the wisdom of the past with the tools of modern science. If we imagine a 19th century household, the transformation becomes vivid. A child washes her hands in a porcelain basin with a bar of soap, lathering until the suds cover her fingers. A mother prepares a weekly bath, filling a tub with hot water carried from the stove. Fresh linens are changed, and clothing is scrubbed with soap in the laundry. The father shaves before a mirror, using soap to soften his beard. Around the family, the scent of soap-clean, sharp, unmistakable fills the air. The home feels different from that of earlier centuries, not only fresher but more orderly, reflecting a new belief that cleanliness was central to health and dignity. The spread of modern hygiene practices also had global effects. Colonization and trade carried soap and bathrooms to new regions, sometimes imposed as symbols of civilization. In many cases, indigenous traditions of bathing and herbal cleansing blended with imported practices, creating hybrid systems of hygiene. The global story of cleanliness became more complex, shaped by both progress and power. By the turn of the 20th century, the modern bathroom was firmly established in much of the Western world. Daily bathing was becoming the norm. Hand washing with soap was widely practiced, and grooming routines for teeth, hair, and skin had standardized. What had once been extraordinary immersion in water, the use of soap, the expectation of fragrance, was now ordinary. Looking back, the journey is remarkable. For thousands of years, people relied on ashes, oils, herbs, and powders. They scraped, perfumed, and improvised, guided by tradition, necessity, and belief. The arrival of soap and plumbing did not erase these older practices, but it reframed them, making cleanliness less about ritual or appearance and more about science and routine. The bathroom became not only a place of washing, but a symbol of modern life, reflecting how far humanity had come from riverside baths and oil-smeared strigils. As we close this chapter, we reach the threshold of the world we know today. The story of hygiene before soap shows us the resilience, creativity, and diversity of human practices across cultures. And the rise of the modern bathroom reminds us that what feels timeless stepping into a shower, lathering with soap, brushing our teeth, was in fact the product of centuries of change. Next comes the closing of our journey, where we will reflect on what this long history of cleanliness tells us not only about the past, but about ourselves and the small rituals we perform every day without a second thought. We have traveled a long way together through the history of personal hygiene. From the riverbanks of Mesopotamia to the scented oils of Egypt, from the olive groves of Greece to the marble halls of Rome, from the ritual baths of India and China to the hammams of the Islamic world, from the perfumes of Europe to the sweat lodges of the New World, each culture, each time period, found its own answer to the timeless question: how do we stay clean? What we discover in this journey is that there has never been a single definition of cleanliness. To some, it meant ritual purity before the gods. To others, it meant social dignity, appearing presentable before family and neighbors. For many, it meant protection, whether against unseen spirits, foul airs, or later, against germs. Cleanliness has always been a reflection of what people valued most. Before soap, the ingenuity of humanity was astonishing. People used ashes, oils, sands, clays, herbs, and powders. They built baths heated by fire, carved cones from bone, chewed sticks to clean their teeth, and invented perfumes to mask odors. They turned to rivers, springs, incense, and ritual to find a sense of renewal. Even when their beliefs about health were mistaken, their creativity and persistence were not. This story also reminds us that cleanliness has always been about more than the body. It has been about spirit, identity, and community. Washing in a river could be a prayer. Scraping oil from the skin could be a mark of discipline. Perfuming clothes could be a way of showing respect to others. The smallest rituals, combing hair, rinsing the hands, chewing herbs, were filled with meaning. When soap finally entered daily life, it changed everything. Its power to lather, to cleanse, and to leave the body refreshed reshaped expectations of hygiene. With plumbing, bathrooms, and germ theory, modern habits were born. But even as we hold a bar of soap today, we are holding the echoes of thousands of years of human effort. That bar is not only a tool, it is a symbol of ingenuity, persistence, and the universal desire to feel fresh and renewed. If you pause for a moment and think about your own daily routines, washing your hands, brushing your teeth, stepping into the shower, you can see how deeply these ancient traditions live on in us. We no longer scrape oil with strigils or rub ash on our skin, but we do carry on the same spirit of care. We cleanse not only to remove dirt, but to feel whole, to feel ready for life, to feel at peace. Perhaps that is the truest lesson of hygiene before soap, that human beings have always longed for renewal. Cleanliness, in whatever form, gives us a sense of starting fresh. It is as much emotional as it is physical. And across time, people found countless ways to achieve it, using whatever nature and culture placed in their hands. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history. If you've enjoyed this story, I'd love for you to be part of our growing community. Please subscribe to History for Sleep so you never miss a new episode, and tap the notification bell if you want each story to be waiting for you when you're ready to rest. And I'd love to hear from you. What parts of history fascinate you most? When do you listen at bedtime, during a nap, or as calming background during the day? And where are you listening from? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read them all, and your ideas help shape future stories. So as you drift toward rest, let your mind wander back through the ages to the rivers, the herbs, the perfumes, the baths, and the endless human quest to feel refreshed. Long before soap, people sought the same peace you seek now, the comfort of washing away the day, the serenity of renewal, the quiet of being clean in body and in spirit. May this story ease you into calm, and may you carry with you the gentle reminder that every simple act of care is part of a long, beautiful history. Good night, and thank you for listening.